Hi folks, we're back and we're cutting through the matrix. And just today, as all days really, I always think about all the big eugenicists and their quotes and how they've talked about bringing down the population. It all ties in with Agenda 21. That's Agenda for the 21st Century. You'll find it at the United Nations website. And the Millennium Projects, it's all part of the same system of rewelding the planet and depopulating the planet as well of all the useless eaters, as Bertrand Russell and others call them. That's all most of us, you see. Those who haven't made the grade and got up to the top of academia, and I mean really at the top of academia, and those who haven't made it to the top in the financial sector and held on to the cash for a few generations to prove that your offspring, you see, are carrying the right kind of genes, because it's all to do with genetics and so on. At least that's how they rationalize it to themselves at the top. And there's nothing new about this at all. Of course, the pharaohs did the same thing. They used to marry their sisters sometimes to keep everything in the family. And money and power marries money and power. And even tribal leaders would often give their daughters away or their sons away to an opposite tribe for marriage reasons, and they'd marry more money and so on. And it was the same thing all through the European system too with the Normans. Same idea as well. They still intermarry themselves today to keep power and wealth together amongst themselves. So it's interesting to see how this is related. And a lot of them ended up as kings and queens of countries, of course, who still marry amongst themselves with their cousins. But you'll find too that there also was an economic factor to them, or a sect to them, that also, like the Rothschilds, who literally became a sort of royalty over cash and central banking. And that was really what they went out to do. And they marry their own nieces and so on, and keep power and money amongst themselves again. Nothing new in eugenics at all, except for the fact that they also attend and fund big future planning committees to make sure that the future will unfold the way they want it to unfold, to suit themselves, that is. They plan things like industrial revolutions, even yet in up-and-coming countries, emerging nations as they call them. And they also like to fund certain sciences as well, to make sure, you see, if anything happens on a disastrous scale, that they themselves will survive. And that's why we know darn well, from many releases that have come out since the Cold War, that all countries across the planet have elite underground bunkers. Some of them are like cities, actually, for the ultra wealthy to live out whatever they have to live out, where it's nuclear radiation, for instance, or atomic warfare with radiation, or even being struck by an asteroid. They cover every possible base. It's just astonishing how science and the top scientists are employed by these people to go over, with their big think tanks, to go over every possible scenario that could possibly happen to ensure what they call survival of the race. And when they say survival of the race, they're not talking about you. And I remember too, I've gone over this scenario so many times, where Darwin, who was put forward by the Royal Society, a Masonic scientific organization that was given a charter to exist on behalf of the Crown, whose first project, by the way, was to make a glass beehive in the grounds in the house that they used for their experiments, to study how the perfect system would be, to study the bees. That represented, of course, humanity itself, where your queens and kings, or really queens at the top. I guess they're all queens now, but anyway, in one sense or another. And the drones, the type of priests, and then, of course, all the workers down below. And how everything was so well organized, everyone knew their job, and that there were no dead weight was carried. Anything that was infirm was simply killed off, stung to death, or tossed out the hive, whatever it was. That's the perfect society that they go by. And Darwin also gave the idea that of an example of an oak tree, for instance. He says that before the oak tree can grow, or even that the acorn can take roots there, microorganisms have to come into the area. Before the animals might graze over it, take up the grass, in come the organisms, even some fungus at times too, and prepares that soil, and worms come in, insects come in, they all come and go in little waves, then they get eaten up too. In other words, everything gets eaten up in turn after it's done its job, in order for that acorn to grow or take seed. Now, a root. Now, the thing is too, He's talking about humanity. Because you see, they go through their histories in their own fashion with their own archives. And they talk about slavery existing in all generations, in one form or another. The great Charles Galton, Darwin, relative of Charles Darwin, in the 1950s, he was a physicist, worked on the Manhattan Project. He came out and said the same thing too. That there's been, in his own book, The Next Million Years, you can find it there. He said there's always been slavery in one form or another, and we are now in the process of creating a more sophisticated form of slavery. It's actually called democracy, if you haven't figured that out, where you think you've got rights and stuff like that. But it's really a system where specialists will decide everything for you through government agencies and laws and fines and force, if need be. That's what he's really talking about. And plus, most of your money that comes in, this disposable income right now, will be gone off in taxes and fees. We know it's going to be carbon taxes, energy taxes, and your basic foodstuffs are going way up through the roof right now. So, in other words, subsistence living, basically just living and getting by on the basics is the system they're bringing in. The rest is to go off into taxes to support the big think tanks and projects for the elite, as you well know. So anyway, it's never stopping. And I kept thinking that today because I thought, well, when you look at what's happening in Japan, it's gone against all the rules for massive atomic leakages or meltdowns, because it's supposed to start filling them in right away. You can't stop them. And it hasn't happened yet. They're still pumping billions of gallons into the sea of radioactive water. That's now millions of times above any safety limit. And no one's telling them to stop it and just bury the things like they did at Chernobyl. That was the only way they started to bring down immediately the radiation levels, was to bury them and encase them in concrete, which is due, by the way, to be dug up this year, I think it is, and replaced. It's going to cost billions of dollars just to do that. But that's what has to be done. But you see, why would they drag it on so long? He's a private company, supposedly, running the show there on behalf of the whole planet, because we're all at stake here, getting to do what they want to do, and they're dragging it on as long as they can possibly do it. Well, what does it do? We know, number one, there's going to be a lot of cancers out there. We know there's going to be an awful lot of sterility out there. And within a couple of years to 15 years, you're going to start to see all the different types of the cancers and leukemias start to emerge. And of course, the medical profession, just like it's already done up till this present time, will churn out a new batch of doctors who are trained to believe that cancers, early cancers, are now very common, and it's always been common. That's what they'll be taught. Just like the present doctors are churned out thinking that 1 in 2 is going to die of a cancer, whereas doctors 30 years ago were turned out, and they knew that certain cancers were very, very rare. Now they're very common. The young doctors don't know that. They think they've been taught the cutting edge of science. That's how you control each generation, quite easily, through academia. So anything can be normalized. As I say, this is going to definitely hit the population across the world. Already is, obviously. So we're under clouds of it, even still going across Canada. And we see the nonsense as they raise all the standards, acceptable standards for radiation of all kinds, up through the roof until we've got new normals that should technically be lethal to us. And we see that the farce of them all, even the EPA, I'll put a link up tonight to the EPA, where they've actually said that so many of the radiation monitors are not working properly because they're recording spikes. Well, when they record spikes, that's generally the alpha or gamma waves coming in. And that's why they spike. So what they're going to do is take them away and fix them so it won't show the spikes. That's how they fix things for the public, you see. So I'll put that link up tonight. And then back to eugenics, because Rockefeller, remember, who's one of the main, their family are intergenerational nihilists, basically, in a sense. They've got this great mission, it seems to be, and I mean that. It's a mission. Certain families have missions, some of these very, very wealthy families, not just to grab the resources of the world and the power of money and so on, and politicians that they can buy and sell, but also they have a mission to depopulate the planet and bring it into this pristine wilderness pre-1700s, basically, is what they've said in their own writings. And that's why they're rewilding North America with mountain lions and pumas and all the rest of it as we're still alive. That's why, folks, if you haven't figured it out, they're doing it because they know you're not going to be around forever. And they're also testing out how these things will survive, and they can create many, many more from their cryogenics labs. They have 3 big arcs across the world. That's been on public broadcasting television for the last few years, where they store literally every kind of life form on this planet in the sperm and ovum variety. They keep them deep frozen, and they have brought them back and fertilized them very successfully, and even used different kinds of animals to be the carriers of pregnancy, and they can give birth to them quite easily. We've watched them also store food in the island of Norway, the seeds of natural plants and so on. And believe you me, they'll have more than that place across the world. An awful lot more than that. Because they always know something's coming. And isn't it amazing from 9/11 to get their new American century through the 21st century, and the century of change. This is a change where academia and science will rule the world as supposed to be on behalf of their financial masters. And they needed that to kick off. The towers came down, bang, bang, and the whole world goes into martial law. Think about it. The whole world goes into martial law because 2 buildings came down in the U.S. That took an awful lot of preparation and negotiation between countries for that to happen years prior. Back with more after this break. Hi folks, we're back, cutting through the matrix, talking about eugenics and how it's so amazing that every part of their plans the big boys make and publish actually, what they want to happen just happens to happen right on cue too. They get what they want one way or another. They also use anything outside of their control to their advantage. That's one of their favorite sayings. How can we use this disaster to our advantage? And if you've noticed right now, so much of the so-called green agenda, and the Greens, remember, put out some good stuff and an awful lot of nonsense too, because you see, they're funded by the big bankers via foundations for the social changes that the big bankers want as well. So there's no real right-wing or left-wing at all in this system. But you find, as I say, that so many things are getting ran through right now. Laws to do with, again, vehicles. They want them off the road by 2050. They're not going to start at 2050. By 2050, that means from here onwards, we're going to have massive increases, not just in gasoline, but in all kinds of taxes to drive your car. They've already put through various laws, or they've got them on the drafting board, basically, to tax you per mile or per kilometer. And that was even discussed years ago, because these guys just pull out the stuff they put away in the shelves years ago, blow off the dust and reproduce it for the time, and the time, of course, is now. It's all done a long time ago. But as I say, it ties in with eugenics, because a long time ago, the eugenics movement really was part of this big scientific push on behalf of, again, the same crew that funded Cecil Rhodes, which is the Rothschilds in Britain, that became the Royal Institute of International Affairs when it merged with the other bankers led by Milner. And they wanted to depopulate after they took over this world. They wrote about it too, how they could make a kind of paradise on earth with much fewer people. They employed hack writers like H.G. Wells to write interesting little stories, little catch stories, and to add certain data in there that would alter the people's perceptions of things. So they'd actually go along with it too. And we also find that the big eugenic societies that we thought were all dead have never been dead at all. They simply changed their names into other things, other orders, organizations, and they've been carrying on with your government funding, by the way. Because you see, the governments are not there to serve you at all. They just use your tax money. That's your purpose at the moment, is to pay taxes and to fund these organizations so that they can eventually get rid of you.